Hey guys, welcome back to What is Your Bitcoin Story podcast. And before we kick off today's episode with Max, I just want to give you a heads up that we did run into technical issues with regards to Max's recording. Thus, the audio and image isn't as smooth as it usually is. There is some glitches in it, but please, if you can, try to sit through it, as this episode is filled with incredible Austrian economics content, the Cypherpunk movement. Max talks about the aspect of praxeology, monetary systems, how to gain and preserve your individual sovereignty, CoinJoin, which is something which is extremely important, everybody should be engaging more in, and much more. So I apologize on behalf of the technical issues, but still I could not resist but release this incredible episode with Max. And be sure that this is not the last time we will be recording another episode with Max, and I will make sure that the next one will be smooth as all other episodes. Without further ado, let's jump into today's episode, and I hope you enjoy it. Privacy is necessary for an open society in the electronic age. Privacy is not secrecy. A private matter is something one doesn't want the whole world to know, but a secret matter is something one doesn't want anybody to know. Privacy is the power to selectively reveal oneself to the world. A Cypherpunk Manifesto by Eric Hughes. Welcome back to What is Your Bitcoin Story podcast, where we explore the incredible journeys of those who have leaped deep down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. I'm your host Gigi, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by the one and only Max Hillebrand. As a praxeologist and cypherpunk, Max has been at the forefront of monetary computer science, paving the way for innovation and privacy in the Bitcoin space. His dedication to free software entrepreneurship has led him to contribute significantly to open source projects such as Bisq, Join Market, and Wasabi Wallet. Beyond his technical expertise, Max is a passionate advocate for individual freedom and self-sovereignty, sharing valuable insights on these topics. In this episode, we will hear about Max's Bitcoin journey and discover how he has made an impact on the community as a builder, educator, and privacy champion. Max, welcome to the show.
Thanks, G, very much for that kind introduction. That was awesome. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
You're very welcome, and thank you for taking the time to jump on the show today. As I told you off the record, I've been waiting for quite some time for it to happen, and here we are today, and I'm really looking forward likewise to our conversation. So I guess we'll kick it off like we do with every episode. So take us back right to the beginning of your orange rabbit hole journey. Where and how did you discover Bitcoin, Max?
When first discovered, quite interested in economics and specifically Austrian economics. So I went through this part of the rabbit hole before Bitcoin, which was quite fortunate and unfortunate because the first time I looked into it, a couple Austrians had voiced critical views of Bitcoin. And so I read these arguments of why Bitcoin isn't really interesting, can't succeed, scarcity cannot be defined in the digital realm. Digital information is non-scarce, so it lacks a basic fundamentals, right, of what it needs to be money. And so kind of disregarded it, thinking that, I already know everything about money and there's not much more interesting there in this weird digital thing. And then it took a couple years to eventually get back to it. And in that meantime, not just that I did further develop my understanding of economics and monetary science, but also I started to appreciate free and open source software. I started to use Linux as my operating system and all types of free open source software tools to live digital life. Realized that praxeology is very much in a strong support of the free and open source ethos and ideals. The two combine to a very large and very great extent, and early cypherpunks knew this as well. Many early cypherpunks were deep into the Austrian literature and thinking about praxeological problems, because ultimately cypherpunks were building tools for humans to communicate and to trade online. And this is something that praxeology explains very beautifully. And so I'm sure that it was of deep importance to the original cypherpunks. And so once I had the combination of these two schools of thought, revisiting Bitcoin, I basically got the instant aha effect, the eureka of it makes sense, get it, this is incredible. And that kicked off an incredibly intense rabbit hole for years now, where I just continue to explore where this wild journey takes me and continue to learn fascinating and interesting aspects of.
Amazing. It's interesting how you said kind of your Bitcoin journey started before Bitcoin itself by going down the Austrian school of economics thought and kind of that knowledge base, which to me it's fascinating how most people, I would say 99.9% of the global population, has no idea where Austrian economics is, and if they did, I mean, the world would be a very different place. And essentially, I presume the reason we don't know about it is because we're not taught about it in schools. We're not taught about finance at all in schools, or essentially saving and critical thinking, which is kind of the school program just molds you into this essentially modern day slave where you just go out to get your job and not ask questions and just pay your taxes and push the cogs forward. But to some people, and I'll let you put your input on that thought.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing, because if we would have economic teachings in school and earlier, then most likely it would be Keynesian nonsense, because that's what the academia is designed to teach. That would lead to quite a lot of harm. But the beautiful thing is that people are just ignorant about the nuances of economic thought, but simultaneously, fundamentally, proper economic thought is incredibly intuitive. Right? So I've met numerous people who've never really read an economics textbook in their life, and ever, but when you talk to them about economics and what it means, and you hear their explanations for trade and money and interest, quite often they're actually correct, or at least very much in the right direction. So I wouldn't underestimate the intuitive understanding that praxeology fundamentally applies.
Okay, I see. And true, like sometimes the best life lessons are learned through experience and speaking and communicating with people more than just reading textbooks and having a teacher tell you what is right, what is wrong. So I guess some listeners, maybe we could give like a quick sum up to what is praxeology, because maybe some listeners are not aware and they're listening and thinking, what is Max and Gigi talking about? What is praxeology? Maybe you can just break it down into simple terms so they can get in, understand it fully.
Praxeology comes from the Greek word praxos, meaning action. Logos, meaning the reason, right, or the of action. And so praxeology, strictly defined, is about how humans act and the consequence of human action. And so Ludwig von Mises, a great thinker and philosopher in this area, laid out that humans always have a problem, right? We all live in a state of uneasiness where we're hungry, we'd like to have some food. It can be as simple as, it can be, that we want to cure some very sophisticated advanced disease, that problems can be small or quite large. And ultimately, we have resources at our disposal that we can allocate to solve these problems. Grow vegetables or raise animals, and then we have meat. But this is basically production. We almost never find that nature directly are the good in such a shape that we can directly consume them. Okay, maybe with berries in forest, that's still the case. You need to actually pick them up out of the forest and put them into your storage or into your mouth at the very least.
You need to do your proof of work.
Exactly.
Doesn't just magically appear.
Something as beautiful as berries that just literally pop out and can be consumed right away. You still need to deliver the good to the place you actually want to consume it, and that is labor, right? So picking the berries is the production that is needed to even consume something as basic as that. And then if you went to look at how to produce a pencil, as one common example, it starts getting extremely complex on how many people need to involve, how many skills, how many technologies, how much wisdom needs to be applied in order to transform the natural resources around us into the actual production and consumption tools or goods that we ultimately would like to enjoy. And so this is an extremely complex process, and magically it just works. So, like for the vast amount of things, humans just create awesome stuff that solves really difficult problems for us, and then we can produce it for thousands of people and trade it, and voila, we've solved problems for many people at scale. So humans just somehow do this, and technology explains you exactly what are the principles of the human design, so to say, that emerge this beautiful construct that is ultimately the market process.
No, it makes sense. I mean, you made it sound very simple, Max, and if we would be solving our problems in a very, straightforward and logical manner, then the world would be flowing in a different route, where today I believe that people like to overcomplicate the problems that can be solved, and there's so much, I would say, noise and distraction that people just get lost in this chaos instead of zooming out and kind of going into a vacuum and just focusing on solving their own problems. Everybody's looking to solve everybody's problems instead of focusing on their own. Don't you think?
Yeah, definitely. That is basically like a question of who owns the problems, right? Like who is responsible for dealing with this? And there are different schools of thoughts here, right? Collectivism and individualism, fundamentally. Right? We can say that a group of people has the problem of others, right? And they get to decide what gets to be done about these problems. Or we can say no, that these problems actually fundamentally belong to the individual, meaning that it's his problem, right? Like that's basically the genius inside of Carl Jung, right? The subjective value theory basically says, a good have a certain quantifiable metric of value that you could compare to other units, right? Because a steak is extremely valuable to a carnivore, but like anti-valuable to a vegan. So there's clearly individual happening on how valuable is this good. And value, again, ultimately comes from which problem is it going to solve for me? And here again, defining the problem is fundamentally individual. Like, I don't know what your problems are, Gigi. Like, I have no idea. It's very difficult to find out what my own problems are. That is difficult enough, but ultimately, I'm the most capable on defining the problems that I perceive myself, because, well, that's part of my experience. Right? So every individual ultimately has this judgment of which your problems ultimately. And this can be as what what type of food would you like to have, and it can be much grander. Like maybe for some reason your problem is to end human monetary slavery, and all of a sudden that's why you're somehow caught up in this Bitcoin thing.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, from what you said there, Max, with collectivism sounds a lot like central bankers, what they're doing to see how they're going to operate everything and how they're going to fix everyone's lives. And then the individualistic approach is just, Bitcoin, stack your own sats, start mining, hodl, run your own node, and not depend on anyone else. Even though Bitcoin as an ecosystem, you are dependent on other nodes and other people to push it forward, because Bitcoin just on its own, it's not going to do anything. It's down to people putting in that proof of work. May that be writing code, may that be creating miners, may that be educating, whatever it is, setting up Bitcoin businesses. So it's intertwined between the two, but I fully agree. And I love the example that you gave with Carl Menger with the steak, right? To a carnivore, it's essentially they'll pay big bucks for it. A vegan will pay nothing, will actually be disrespected by the steak. So it's definitely the perceived value of goods, which gives us its true value.
Yeah, exactly. And this is where, again, it just makes sense for everyday common thinking that goods have different values to different people. And that's an understanding that's extremely intuitive. It's still all of, let's say, mainstream academics in economics completely disregards the fact, and only the Austrian School of Economics fundamentally takes this as a proper axiom, a starting point to continue further on. And money is another of these concepts where in classical economics, you have these extremely elaborate and difficult mathematical formulas that try to define what a money is. It doesn't really make much sense. Mm-hmm. And then for Austrians, it's quite simple. Like money is the stuff that entrepreneurs want before they give you the good in exchange. Right? And that stuff, whichever good ultimately is paid by most merchants for generally anything that they're selling, well, that's by definition the money, right? That's the thing that you can buy anything with. And that is, again, a very simple and intuitive definition that most people would share.
Yeah, no, I agree on that point. And on the topic of Bitcoin and monetary system, how would you like to see, since nobody really has a crystal ball to see what's going to happen in the future, but how would you like to see Bitcoin transforming the monetary system and the way people exchange value now and
yeah, this was something that I actually did in part of my bachelor thesis with the title Anarchy in Money. I think it's the ultimate importance that Bitcoin emerges onto this world. And that is to allow individuals to define monetary units on their computers, ultimately. Right? This is what a Bitcoin full node does. It sets exactly the specific piece of rule of how should this money that look like. And therefore, the ultimate full nodes define and the set of rules and they continue to verify, right? When they connect to a peer-to-peer network, all information that is wrong according to the rule defined by the individual node is simply discarded, deleted, and the peer is put on a blacklist. And so that means we not just verify that other people adhere to the same set of rules than us, but we also enforce it. And that if someone breaks the set of rules, you stop talking to them. And it means that we can define monetary good from the ground up. And it's just code running on computers. And information is easy to spread and to stifle. So once this technology is out there, humans have the ability to create new digital monetary units for rather cheap cost. This is something that we haven't really experienced so far. Right? We never had the ability to create a properly secure digital monetary network at a whim, and Bitcoin was to prove that in fact we can figure this out. And this means ultimately there is no monopoly on the production of money on the grand scheme of things. Whereas before in the past, governments, if you try to create your own money, they would always have ways to stop you. And therefore, the only available option on the market of money, so to say, was once controlled by tyrants and who could manipulate the rules of this money because it was not defined and enforced by everyone, but it simply verified and enforced by a class of rulers. And it's to quite a destructive mindset for people and destructive outcomes in the economy. For long, Cypherpunk have wondered how can we put an end to such a thing. And the ability to opt out is the most powerful here because it provides people an option to disregard a broken and bad old system and use a newer and better and freer technology that's simply cheaper and faster and better and easier and more beautiful. So that these are the reasons why people like Bitcoin and that's all that they need to leave behind bad and broken fiat systems.
Yeah, you bring up a very valid point, Max, that we've never in the history of humanity had a monetary system where the people invented it and put it out and started using it. Ever since the monetary system started thousands of years, like exchanging stones and then gold and then, paper money, everything was always defined and there was always a ruler, there was some monarch, there was somebody that was controlling that source of money and given its value. And with Bitcoin coming on the scene some 15 years ago, now suddenly we have the control of it and nobody actually has the manipulative powers to inflate or deflate it. And to me, like my light bulb moment was the scarcity aspect, the limited supply, right, of the 21 million, which everybody very well in the space knows. I mean, that's the first time ever that we have in the physical or digital realm an asset that is scarce and there's never going to be more of it. We can deplete and have more of everything. Gold is getting mined every year more and more, and nobody really knows how much gold there really is in the world. Land, I mean, there's so much land and we can build artificial land like we're seeing all over the world. But with Bitcoin, no matter how much influence, how much power, how much basic machinery you have, there's only so much, the 450 Bitcoins that are getting mined per day. And that's it. I mean, it's beautiful that the math overpowers everybody's ability and kind of desire to have more of this beautiful hard asset.
Yeah, absolutely. And in old Cypherpunk once told, the original vision was like, what if we could trust someone else's computer? That someone else runs a piece of computation and gives you the result. And you could actually be convinced that he provided a proper calculation. And that is a holy grail in the Cypherpunk world. And why? Well, because the original versions of digital money were all centralized ultimately. A single entity, a single computer defined and verified and enforced the set of rules of the monetary system. And the problem is, how can we trust him that he's not changing the rules properly into his favor or the favor of his friends? And that's a massive trust assumption that how beautiful it would be if we could use cryptography and computer science to alleviate such a trust model. And, by the way, to a large extent, we have achieved in doing this. Like the latest generations of hardware do have like secure enclaves and trusted virtual environments where computers can test to the correctness of the computation that was performed, which is quite mind-blowing, by the way, and solves a lot of problems. But back when Satoshi was designing Bitcoin, these solutions did not yet exist. So again, how can we trust someone else's computer to define and verify and enforce the rules of the money? And Satoshi realized we can't. We need to define for ourselves so that someone else cannot just change the rules. We need to verify for ourselves so that someone else cannot just let people in that violate the rules, and ultimately we need to enforce it ourselves. All of these three functions need to be in the hands of the end user, ultimately, in order to have a trustless monetary experience in the digital realm. And that means that every user needs to read and verify every single action of every single other user in the entire stack of the protocol, right? Even our future generations will have to verify the transactions that we are doing right now if Bitcoin continues to function as it currently does. And well, that sounds like a ridiculous idea because obviously it doesn't scale, right? And it's also not very private. If we all need to basically surveil everyone else's financial transactions, sure, nobody's increasing the money supply. And that's so Bitcoin is quite ridiculous on many levels. The thing is just, it somehow works and it still doesn't break, and it seems it will continue to be around, and then likely people will continue using it for the set of rules that it is and the stability that it represents.
Yeah, and hopefully, I mean, I wouldn't want to say that people should use it for what it was intended. Satoshi named it, the header in the white paper was peer-to-peer digital cash. But today, you know, as we saw this whole epidemic, I call it, of you know, plugging NFTs and JPEGs on and congesting the blockchain, and future generations and anybody setting up a node today needs to be downloading all this mass of useless data, kind of goes against it. But at the same time, it's a double-edged sword, right? Who are we to say what can go on there or not, right? Like, it's a free market. People can decide what they want to do. If you want to be, you know, want to be silly and spend crazy amount of money to put a JPEG or your own picture on the Bitcoin blockchain, go forward and do so. But in the future, I think it's just not going to make any economical sense to do it. So I guess it's this group of people that have kind of been scamming all these other chains, from the Solanas, from the Ethereums and everywhere, and kind of decided, you know, that's all dying off. Let's go to Bitcoin because that's still going strong. Because as you said, Max, TikTok next block, Bitcoin's always working, and it's only getting more appreciation and more trust and more following. But what's your take on this kind of ordinal inscription that's been happening over the last 12, 15 months?
I think what Satoshi meant in the white paper of the electronic cash is also, again, heavily influenced by praxeology, because what the cash means in the praxeological lens is that is not a claim on something else, but it's something that is the thing itself. The classical analogy is physical coin, right? That's cash, that's base money. This gold, the bar of gold, it's where you can hold it, you can continue to save it, you can spend it, whatever, right? And you're not waiting for someone else to give you something with this. Like, this is the gold that you're actually saving, and that other people would like to trade for directly. But then there is something what's known as money substitute, right, or money certificates. This is when you take your bar of gold and you give it to a specialist who has a big vault, you know, a bank, money warehouse, a safe provider, and he in turn gives you a paper certificate saying whoever has this piece of paper gets the bar of gold back. And now that piece of paper is, however, not the actual bar of gold itself. However, the piece of paper might be as gold. And if the service provider is honest and doesn't create more paper certificates than he actually has gold, and if he continues to be profitable so that he doesn't like depreciate his capital reserves, if he continues to be secure and not lose access to the vault or get hackers or thieves break in, etc. Under all of these conditions, which might hold or might not, you can redeem an actual physical bar of gold from the money warehouse if you have this piece of paper. And so what we had in the digital realm for a long time before Bitcoin was money warehouses. Right? This in 1983, right, where David Chaum worked on first versions of eCash, blind signature, which we now know as Casio or Fedimint currently. This is basically a technology where someone can give you a bar of gold and you give him, instead of a piece of paper, electronic digital signature. And these signatures can now be transferred to other people, and ultimately with the sense of redeeming them from the mint to get your piece of gold or your physical dollars back. And that failed in the long run because this always required to have banking access of these money warehouse providers, and where they can receive large amounts of fiat currencies as deposits and be able to send out large amounts of fiat currencies onto securely, with, of course, the nation state the number one adversary. So this failed quite frequently, and therefore Satoshi realized we don't need money warehouse receipts, right? We have the technology, it's cool, But what's missing is the base money itself, right? The cash, the underlying asset, physical, so to say. And this is what Bitcoin is about, in my opinion. It's this definition of set of rules that creates a base monetary asset, which we can then use a money warehouse receipts, which we see now proliferate with.
Yeah, it's an interesting take on that, and especially with being at BTC Prague, there was a lot of talk, and kind of eCash was this hot topic of what's happening with Cashew and Fedimint, kind of to alleviate all this stringent and kind of congestion on main chain transactions, and having a different, that just being a settlement layer, but then doing essentially layer 2 solutions, peer-to-peer exchanging tokens on that basis. And similarly, just like Lightning is doing, right? You're exchanging micropayments, and then that just gets batched into a block as an aggregate of transactions, which I think as we move forward, we will just keep on innovating and finding new solutions to transact more efficiently between each other, and just have Bitcoin layer 1 as this kind of final settlement between wallet addresses, right?
Yes, basically. Then, of course, the thing is that Bitcoin is ultimately pieces of information. Bitcoin transactions are just bits and bytes, ones and zeros, numbers, ultimately.
Yeah.
Then the real question is, which set of numbers, ultimately, right, which bits of bytes are to be considered a valid Bitcoin transaction and which are not? Right? And so Bitcoin ultimately is a very exhaustive set of rules of what specifically is not a valid Bitcoin transaction, and what cannot be in a block. Which structure of information, if it is included in a block, means that this block is invalid. And Bitcoin is like full outright censorship of a bunch of different of information and communication that humans could do, but that if they do it, they simply violate the protocol. That's just the case with Bitcoin. That's the case with any protocol, right? Computer protocol, meaning two computers communicate with each other, is very strictly defined on which orders must zeros and ones be. And if there's mistakes, then there's simply a crash, an error, right? Where you're not speaking the same language as the other person, and that's a mismatch. And so obviously there's a lot of opinionated detail in the implementation of this set of Bitcoin rules. Satoshi could have chosen a lot of different parameters. 21 million Bitcoin, completely arbitrary, right? And it could have been any number that Satoshi wanted. Even like things like, for example, the signature scheme, completely arbitrary, or the scripting language, completely arbitrary. How frequent are the blocks? How high is the difficulty? And all of these things are very subjective. Like Satoshi just picked a number out of his ass basically, for a lot of these. And again, with some miracle, it survived. And
it was a nice combination.
Exactly. It was a very nice conversation that just worked. And apparently, if you tweak some of these variables in other ways, there's always trade-offs associated with it. And that's, again, also, by the way, why I think the whole shitcoin space is exciting. And this is where we get even more market innovation and competition on finding a better set of rules for a monetary system. I'm quite sure that we will eventually find a set of rules that is fundamentally better than Bitcoin. That would be great. Again, some of the things can be improved in Bitcoin quite substantially. We changed the signature algorithm recently to Schnorr signatures, which is sophisticated and deep change, or segregated witness before massive reorganization of a set of rules in the Bitcoin system. And so the system is still alive and not just performing as it is right now, but continuously bringing in the capabilities that it has. And the thing is, though, seemingly nothing can kill Bitcoin. It just keeps going, right? And so at least we should probably improve it a little bit so that it keeps being better, instead of a system that we cannot kill that really turns out to be quite bad.
Yeah, just like most people are worried about AIs taking over the jobs and killing us in the end, but that's a story for another time. But in regards to Bitcoin, what I love about the Bitcoin protocol is that these changes are happening, but they're happening at a slow pace, and slowly making sure that the changes are in the benefit of the system compared to the other projects that are happening in the alternative chains, which are just constantly changing things, and things are not working and then rebooting. What's that saying that the English have? Nice and steady wins the race. So I fully relate that to Bitcoin, slowly moving forward, doing these careful changes. And as you said, everything in life is a constant. You need to keep on changing and evolving, or else things just go stale and they go out of date. So But I think at the moment with Bitcoin, one thing that's very kind of hammered down, especially by governments and different jurisdictions, is this privacy concept, right? That the big Western states, they don't like the privacy of individuals, and I know privacy is your soft spot and your passion. And what we've seen over the last few months, especially with the Whirlpool being shut down and Samurai guys going to jail, and even with one of the projects that you've been heavily involved with Wasabi Wallet having to close the aggregator Whirlpool. How do you see the privacy concept evolving in Bitcoin, and what would you like to see, or what is the right way to move forward in that trajectory?
Yeah, the privacy in the blockchain space is a very, very difficult topic, simply because, again, ultimately with Bitcoin, we need to verify every transaction. So this is a large data size and heavy computational burden to do this verification. And if we have verification algorithm that's more complex than an alternative, it's quite difficult to verify it, because if it takes 100 times as long to verify the Bitcoin blockchain, for example, because of some sophisticated privacy technology, then that's quite a downside. Right? And this is, again, ultimately Bitcoin is a rule enforcement and verification machine, and that is its prime purpose and its prime reason for architecture and design ultimately. And it would be great to improve the overall privacy of the system. What we've realized, though, is that we don't need to change the set of rules fundamentally in order to achieve substantial better privacy. And we can actually just build a transaction graph of inputs and outputs in a more conscious way and a more sophisticated way, rather than the first naive attempts that were made. Simply engineering better on how should we structure the data in our transactions and inside our blocks with simple techniques like, for example, CoinJoins, which is multiple people partaking in a single large transaction instead of each of them being in their own separate, smaller individual transaction. Just aggregating users on the transaction level improves privacy substantially, to a way that I don't think it's broken anymore. It actually works quite well, and we've seen it work in on mainnet to very sophisticated extent. Yeah. I think on-chain privacy, even with the current set of rules, for a transactional aspect in the electronic cash sense, basically, it's as much as a train wreck as it was 5 years ago or 10 years ago, let's call it like that. There are still a lot of fundamental improvements that could be made, but ultimately the technology has advanced sufficiently so that it is possible to receive and hold and spend money, so that none of the people whom you're interacting with knows how many transactions you make or what's the size of your savings and where exactly you're spending your money. All of this information can be hidden, not just from the general global observer, but even from the people whom you're interacting. And so that's quite encouraging. But still, there's numerous improvements, specifically on second layers, etc., where the actual privacy is quite sufficiently improved as well. But specifically with CoinJoin technology, what was the focus on it, or is the focus on it, Wasabi Wallet, is a core solution to the UTXO-based privacy model.
I was going to say, so what's happening now with essentially the Whirlpool was closed and Wasabi, from my understanding, but I wanted to kind of hear it from your end, there's kind of independent aggregators that you can CoinJoin now on a Wasabi, or what's the pretext at the moment with CoinJoining?
Yeah, so fundamentally CoinJoin again requires multiple users to provide inputs and outputs and signatures to this single aggregated Bitcoin transaction. And this is, again, fundamentally a consensus problem, because all of these people need to agree on exactly which transaction are they signing. Again, every single bit, every single 0 and 1 is important. All current implementations of CoinJoins rely on a central party to coordinate this consensus problem ultimately. And so this is where centralized coordinators come in, which are nothing more than a computer as basically a public bulletin board, a message board where people can write the inputs and outputs and signatures, again, which are just 0s and 1s, right? Just bits and bytes of a message, a group message, basically. It's a group message board. And the coordinator is here to ensure that it's a fast and efficient communication protocol and that bad actors can be kicked out. because one obvious attack is that I register 100 Bitcoin on the output side of the transaction onto my address, because I'd like to have 100 Bitcoin, but I put nothing on the input side, which, like, we don't have a valid Bitcoin transaction. And so these types of shenanigans can be disrupt the end result of the service, because ultimately we want to have not just a transaction which we've all signed, but a transaction which is also valid to the Bitcoin consensus rules, specifically that there is no output gated out now. And a coordinator helps ensure this across a longer period of time. But ultimately, this coordinator cannot run away with users' monies or trick them into sending the money where they don't want. It's just a pure communication relay, and which means it's extremely easy and straightforward to run. Doesn't require a heavy, beefy server. You don't even need to have a full node for it, actually. You could just as well call mempool.space or some other public blockchain API service to get the necessary information. And so there is also a way to announce that a coordinator is existing, right? And NOSTR is being used for this, another interesting protocol, where a coordinator simply signs a message with a private key saying that I'm a coordinator, this is the protocol that I support, here's the address, the URL, which can be clear text or Tor, and where you can get configuration, and people review these coordinators and say, yes, this is a good one or a bad one. There's aggregators that show how much volumes does each of these coordinators have, etc. And then people can choose to connect to any of them to coordinate transactions with the other peoples that are talking to this coordinator.
Yeah, and I guess, have you witnessed more people launching their coordinators since this kind of fight on privacy started from the US government and kind of shutting down centralized coordinators, or it's on the quiet end?
No, I would say it's definitely
your own experience.
More people than before. Because in the past it was mainly a couple tinkerers who were just trying it out. Two or three other ones that they kind of stuck around. But a lot of them, for example, were with the Wasabi 1.0 protocol that used some quite ancient cryptography, etc., to make it work. And then as we switched to the new Wabi-Sabi protocol, a much more sophisticated cryptography system, there were, I don't think, many alternative coordinators other than the one that CK-Snacks was running. But then more and more started popping up.
That's great to hear. I mean, we need more people contributing and giving options, because at the end of the day, the more options you have, the better it is, and the harder it is for the bad parties, may that be the governments or regulators or whoever, to try and suppress privacy. And on the topic of privacy, maybe, you mentioned CoinJoin. What are some other things that, our listeners could take into account when it comes to, protecting your privacy whilst you're using Bitcoin? As there's many other things, but I mean, just top level, what are some things that you would list that are crucial for people to consider when using Bitcoin?
Well, there's quite a lot of things, but I guess one fundamental one is
the most important ones.
One fundamental one, it's not maybe the most important, but definitely consider it your operating system itself. And like my journey to free open source software started when I realized that the Microsoft corporation controlled system would not have the best incentives at heart to provide me a good and useful, and that there are in fact free and open source alternatives that don't require patents, etc., which is a much more ethical and much more secure way to actually work with your computer. So consider trying something out that's as simple as Ubuntu or Pop OS, and maybe go into some fancier area like CubesOS. And for the phone, FinOS is definitely an alternative. Android only, but it gets the job done quite well. And then more specific, but still general, is to use network-level privacy techniques. As these are specifically the Tor network, which is an onion layering message transport protocol, a quite useful and beautiful technology, and this is quite versatile and can be used, for example, just for browsing the web, to get the Tor browser, which works just basically like Chromium or Firefox. This is reliable with many websites, but definitely a major upgrade to your privacy. But the cool thing is that Tor can also be integrated into applications itself. So for example, Wasabi Wallet is probably still one of the most sophisticated clients to the Tor protocol. There's like 20 Tor identities created parallel, where each API call gets its new Tor identity and such. You can use the Tor protocol and software to develop quite advanced and sophisticated, like third-party means that still provide good network-level privacy to your user. And then for all of your other applications, VPNs are also quite useful, simply to have one additional hop in between you and the actual data source. So yeah, these are some quite general basics. And then ultimately, I think it's all about choosing a software that has a privacy-focused developed in the default application, and so that you don't have to change a lot of the preferences and nuances. In order to be secure, software should be designed in such a way that it is secure by default. And there are a few, because it's quite difficult to develop this stuff, but they definitely do exist. So yeah, take just good care with the software that you're installing and make sure that the developers have some reasonable path forward.
Yeah, I mean, on the topic of Tor, like it's not as smooth and swift kind of experience as it is with normal internet usage, but at the same time, it's one pay up that you're doing for having that privacy online for nothing being able to track. It's kind of, having to evaluate, what's more important to you to have the fastest user experience or to have the safest one. And you can always mix and match. It's not a black and white world, right? You can use them whenever you want to do some more sensitive stuff on the Tor network, and then the more casual on essentially the ClearNet, right?
Yeah, absolutely. This, for example, another aspect of this might be dual booting operating system. You could have Windows installed in parallel to Linux, for example. That's a quite reasonable option as well. Or to just, of course, use many different coin wallets. You might have some that are much more focused on privacy for larger amount of your holdings. So then when it's optimized, and multi-signatures, etc., for long-term storage, and something that is integrated well with Lightning for data payments. Use the right tool for the right job. But the cool thing is, by now we have quite a sophisticated and deep infrastructure of technology that is secure and useful and rather cheap, at least for now. Even we can still improve this and make the experience a lot smoother and easier. Don't get discouraged from trying now.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, going out to test, and even though people don't like trying out new things, you do have to go out, because you'll never know if you like something without giving it a try. And going back to what you mentioned, using open source operating systems, not just on your computers, your desktops and your laptops, but also your mobile phones with Graphene OS. To the listeners, Max is actually the one that uncovered the Graphene OS to myself in Prague. We're actually looking to schedule this recording, and I was like, wow, well, what is this operating system? And Max goes, it's Graphene OS on Android. And not even 2 weeks later, I came back home from the trip. I ordered my first Pixel. I booted on the Graphene OS, which for the listeners, it's the easiest thing to do. If you're a non-technical person like I am, you can get it set up in a matter of 10, 15 minutes. And from then on, it was a very liberating feeling of knowing that, I left the iOS system, being an iPhone fanboy for over a decade. But then over the years, having this at the back of my mind that everything that I'm doing, and to some people, the most sensitive digital interactions which they're doing is actually on their phone, not their PC, right? The photos of their loved ones, the key passes, your emails, your passwords, like a lot of sensitive data, your document copies, everything's on your phone. And having big data companies just collecting and storing it on their own servers, which is essentially what a cloud is, right? It's someone else's computer. Having left that world and going to Graphene OS, and I'm in the process of setting up my own next cloud. So I have my own personal server at home, so that everything is just stored in my own control. It's a very liberating feeling, and it's hard to explain unless you actually go out and experience it. So to that, Max, thanks a lot for putting me on that pathway of leaving the iOS system and adopting the Graphene OS. And I try to recommend it to as many people as possible, because most people have no idea it exists. They just see, the usual Android system or iOS, and that's it. But there's always options if you look deep enough.
Yeah, absolutely. And defaults matter. And for most people, the default is buying the most promoted phone and leaving the default operating and applications that are installed by default. That's the obvious path. That's truly what most people will do. And so just of the problems that is inherent to choosing something that isn't optimized for protection and security, it's at least that this information is out there, right? And that the technology is at a point where when people do discover that want an upgrade and use better technologies, that's actually possible, right? And there's not regressions and missteps that you need to take. Like 2 years ago or something, using Graphene OS came with some very serious downsides, right? Like, for example, traditional banking applications didn't work. And that's just unacceptable for most people. And so it's not really a viable option. Right? But now it's at a point where these applications work flawlessly with a very fine-grained compromise setup, right? Where at least your other open source applications cannot be compromised by having, Google Play services and its banking app installed in this one isolated environment. Android is actually quite similar to the Cube operating system in this extent that you have a virtual machine for each application. You basically never install two pieces of software on the same computer. They're always in this virtual computer separate from each other. And that just is a substantial security improvement. And now we've come to it really is as easy as saying, oh, just install Graphene OS, or, well, just get a Bitcoin wallet, and voila, you have a secure phone, a secure money, a holistic set of privacy across these metrics. And that's awesome. That this option exists is crucial. And to a large extent, that means we've already won.
It is indeed. And just the fact of, as I mentioned, like how simple it is today. I don't know how complicated Graphene OS was before and kind of the limitations, but nowadays in 2024, installing it's a piece of cake, and anybody can do it that has a smartphone. And the interesting thing is, you would think that by upgrading and hardening your security, you need to pay more. You're actually saving money because the Pixel phone is like half the amount of the flagship Samsung or iPhone today. So you're actually saving some money to stack some more sats for the future, and you're getting your privacy back, which is the number one goal. So definitely something to consider. But on the aspect of protocols and taking control back, so we said Bitcoin taking back control of your money, the Graphene OS taking control back of your telecommunications. And then one protocol that you mentioned, NOSTR, which is, especially after NOST which was a huge hit this year. And I'm really, really disappointed that I wasn't able to make it. There was some personal reasons, but I was really looking forward to attend my first NOSTR event. But nonetheless, I've been witnessing, and I'm sure you saw the same thing, Max, with the amount of new Nostriches coming up on the network and how many people are slowly, if not fully leaving, are kind of testing it out. And NOSTR is a lot of people underestimate what NOSTR could potentially do to the way we interact and all the content creation that is happening, where we're kind of leaving the big corporations, which they control all your data and they can censor you no matter what platform you're using, the X, the YouTube, the Instagrams, taking back control of your data and building upon it in this new sandbox that we're all building together. It's a very exciting time in history.
Absolutely. Nost other of the just weird moments in our timeline, similar to Bitcoin, were like a very naively, stupidly designed protocol that's just like really weird and kind of bad in hindsight. Like nevertheless, it works so well, and it will spawn so many alternative ideas that spawn from this different mode of thinking. And Nostr is this paradigm of we simply have messages that are signed by private keys. And messages have some structure to it so that both humans can read it and computers can interpret it as well and make it a more. It's so simple. It's so naive. But nevertheless, the last 2 years, it's just exploded in activity and in use cases. Like you can do so many things with this extremely simple use case. And then, I mean, at the very least, we have an amazing period of experimentation where we can come up with 1,001 amazing, cool new ideas of how we could build an application actually like in the next generation, so to say, better, which is likely. But even more, Nostr is so simple that like despite how stupid it is, or maybe because of how stupidly simple it is, it has a chance of surviving in the long run and actually building a good network effect among itself. And this vision of multiple clients being interoperable with each other across this one shared suite of protocols is a really cool vision. So, Satoshi said Bitcoin might be a pocket of liberty for a short time until we find the next great thing. And we found a lot of next great things after Bitcoin, and a lot of this actually turned out to improve Bitcoin to such an extent that maybe Bitcoin is actually good enough and even better than we thought it ever could be. And I'm quite sure that something will be to Nost. But already what we see around like hundreds, thousands of clients and relay implementations that do all types of fantastically crazy cool stuff. It's going to be a lot of fun to further develop.
And how fast as well, Max, right? It hasn't even been like 2.5 years, like just what we saw in like a span of time. It just went, it's crazy. Imagine in the next 5 years, over the weekend, I was listening to the panel with Jack Dorsey and Odell, where they were talking about where Odell was asking Jack if in 5 years he thinks, NOSTR will have more users than Twitter. And, he said realistically, no, but that doesn't matter. The fact is just that the growth is happening and the innovation is happening on it. And people tend to think that Nostr is just a decentralized Twitter, but it's much more than that. You can stream music on there. You can do as we're discussing now with NWS, right? I mean, there's so many things, and the beautiful thing is that every day there's new clients, there's new features being built. Just the amount of creativity that's happening. It's not just sitting down and we're all waiting for one dream team to come out and say, oh, here's a new feature or here's this addition. Everybody can go out and build in it. And I think collectively, that's what makes it even stronger and resilient, that there's collaborative progress on the protocol.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, for example, with Bitcoin, there was always this area of Satoshi, this like creator of the entire universe, and like absolute hero figure. But at the end, he was just a dude. And I realized that especially with Nost, because like the creators of Nost are just dudes. Like, these are my friends, we've been hanging out at conferences and just having fun online, while like these are not extraordinarily super beings, like not any better than you or me fundamentally. These are just average dudes. But look, the magnitude and the accumulated power that just a couple of random dudes on the internet can have when they get their shit together and start organizing and formalizing, a protocol and the structure of how they would like their computers to talk to each other. It's incredibly powerful how intense of an impact a small group of dedicated people can have. And again, probably the best thing that Bitcoin and Nostr even more will prove to be, it activates a bunch of people to become creative and start doing beautiful things that make the world a better place. And as more we can unleash this creativity and remove the barriers that hold these people back to manifest a world that they truly think is better, the more we will benefit.
Yeah, it's very interestingly put, and I agree. You want to dedicate your time and efforts to something that you believe in than just going with the general bias. And I've seen recently, you're no longer on X, because I tried to search you up when I was doing some prep, and there's no more Max Hillebrand on X. So I guess you're just exclusively now on Nostr, right?
Yes, already for some time I haven't posted on X at all or even browsed it. Especially the browsing was quite frustrating. So for a lot of my activity was just reposting.
Very negative.
Yeah, exactly. I was just reposting stuff that my friends were posting, basically, for fun. But ultimately, I got tired of that and just realized the merchant, which is what I did realize as well with Bitcoin. Where back in the days, I had the realization, you as the person who produces something of value, something that you're selling to others, providing to others, you have an incredible power to demand certain things as a payment for the provision of this service, right? Again, you can find for yourself under which conditions will you want to work with someone else. But not that's anything that someone else dictates to you fundamentally. You can and you should define it for yourself. And so for me, defining that I choose to get paid in a fiat shitcoin, that a token, the system of slavery of this really, really bad monetary system, is simply not acceptable. And me refusing to accept fiat is instead demanding to get paid in a sound and honest and honorable piece of technology, ultimately, has a quite substantial impact. First of all, it removes my karmic debt of contributing to this broken system and therefore continuing to proliferate it and expand it outwards. And further, I just don't have to worry about being in a bad system. That it's quite a liberating process. And so for quite some time, this is the same. The similar mindset is be helpful in the adoption of Nostr, where content creators to say can simply exclusively publish on this one platform and therefore incentivize people who truly want to listen to come there and to experience it for themselves, right? Because I mean, like, seriously, just imagine like how much good the early drug dealers on Silk Road do. Because people who just want to get high, they had to go through the annoying friction of
And
buying Bitcoin first. And just imagine the amount of people that got changed simply by the stubbornness of some merchants to say, I don't want that fiat shit. I want to get paid in something true and ethical. And that alone has healed so many souls accountable, right? And I think we have the opportunity to do this again with this other protocol that is all about communication and human communities, which is arguably a much bigger deal than just the money. Here again, I think when we start using ourselves and encouraging the people who would like to listen to us to also jump onto this new experience of being a part of a system where that is not fundamentally defined by a system of control and slavery, but where the user ultimately is responsible for the integrity of the experience that he creates himself. And that is a very liberating mindset that I hope we can just will into existence by stubbornly refusing to use alternatives.
Amazingly put. As you said, Max, you kind of give people that no choice. If you really want to go and follow my path, there's where to find me. I'm not going to be dedicating my time and effort to maybe platforms or monetary systems that I don't see eye to eye with. And I think that's the right move to do. I've been seeing a lot of people that have been just exclusively moving to NOSTR, and I think that will further accelerate the adoption of it because, as you said, Max, it pushes people to go out and try it out for themselves. And once they get there, they go, oh my God, this is much more than just posting notes. There's endless possibilities and apps that are being built on it and can already be used today. So I find it extremely exciting, just like you, Max, with regards to Nost, where we are and what's going to happen. I'm in this kind of dilemma with my podcast, which is only a year old. I was considering to just go Nostr only and leave X, but at the same time, not that I want to support X, it's I want to get, I try to get people to learn about Bitcoin and accept it and learn more about it through storytelling. And to me, posting on X is also trying to get more people to find out about the show. So if it would be just my personal account, I wouldn't think twice. It would be forget X and just move solely to Nostr. But being in my position as a podcast show, what would you advise me? Do you think it's the right thing to still post stuff on X just to kind of spread awareness of the show and get people to consider and have that leap of going into Bitcoin and learning about Nostr through it? Or would you just say, screw it all and GG, just post on Nostr?
Well, I guess ultimately, it's an ecosystem. We need both. We need people posting on the new system to actually show that there is something there worth listening to. And arguably, that's a very underdeveloped space right now. And there's many more people talking about on Twitter than true people on Nostr entirely, right? As this is definitely to be considered. On the other hand, raising your peers and helping all the other people understand the importance and impact of these technologies is equally or arguably even more important, right? I think to the masses, even though they might not like what you are saying or might be on platforms that fundamentally oppose the message of what you're saying, nevertheless, there will be a substantial amount of people who might listen, and people getting exposed to this simply means you have to catch the old place where they're currently. So both is fundamentally important. And the cool thing is that, good content will get reposted on Twitter as well, and information belongs to free. It's impossible to enforce that none of your message will be rebroadcasted on Twitter. Right? It's just a thing because people will do a screenshot and link to, NJump links and others. So that just means that both is required for this to continue, and both will happen. And the question is just, which do you want to take in? Because, well, trying to convince the masses on foreign or even enemy territory is quite difficult, and you will get a lot of mud thrown at your face. Not saying that it's all hunky-dory in Nostr and nobody will oppose you, but at least there's a lot of the fundamental agreements right from the get-go. And so me personally, I just prefer to actually think about advanced and difficult topics and the nuances of such. And I'm not as much interested anymore in orange pilling with the very basic ideas. And this is extremely meaningful to do, and I have done and will continue for a while. Nevertheless, for me personally, it's just much more fulfilling to go deep. And these deep dives, especially in the Bitcoin space, are absolutely doable on Nostr exclusively, arguably a much more dense and focused conversation. Ultimately, both is important, both is meaningful. Just do what blows your boat.
That's great advice, and thank you very much for it, Max. I mean, at the end of the day, I still want to spread the message, and if I just go solely to Nostr, then hypothetically, all those people that would be following me on Twitter wouldn't be hearing me talk about Nostr in every episode. And, it only takes so many times for people to hear about Nostr to say, you know what, actually, let me give it a go. So
absolutely,
at the end of the day,
and there's also to consider here that building a audience in Nostr early, where there is still, it's easy to grab a vast majority of the mind share, so to say. This will help you to build a quite large audience if Nostr ever succeeds in being a thing. And so just by being there in Nost early, in a couple of years, you will have a way larger audience than focusing a lot on Twitter, where the general Twitter audience is likely to diminish rather than go up exponentially faster. So, think of in 3 or 4 years, all of the people who left Twitter and are on Nostr, will they care about all of the work that you put into the Twitter experience? Or will you be much more recognizable if you already have a more developed and sophisticated account on Nostr?
Very true. Very true. It's once again about the longevity, and as you said, on X, you're Nemo, you're a tiny fish in a huge ocean, and then in Nostr, more or less, everybody's kind of a medium-sized fish in a medium-sized pond, right? Everybody's kind of creating their own, I want to say persona, but like their own state of flow and content creation. So I appreciate that advice, Max. I was in a dilemma for a few weeks now, not knowing what to do. But after this conversation with you, I guess I know what to do. Just keep on pushing them both. Nostr being a bit more personal to it, and I want to engage more, as you said, like yourself, on deeper things, discussions, and learning more on that. And then X just broadcasting and getting new people to discover Bitcoin and come along for the ride and hopefully become self-sovereign individuals and join us.
Yeah, exactly. And I think whichever path you take, it's going to be meaningful, and you'll meet a lot of good friends and worthwhile projects. Now, being a podcast is truly a hack to life, because all of a sudden interesting people are happy to talk to you for like 2 hours, just randomly, and like it because, mutual beneficial trait. It's amazing, right? So it's win-win. The host benefits, the benefits, the audience benefits. It's a beautiful showcase of the market of what's possible. And so just try to find more and more ways that you can apply a win-win-win situation in your life, and then just focus on doing that, because it's just fun to win. You can win all the time.
True. No, nobody likes losing. Very true. So to slowly round it up, I have another question I wanted to ask you, Max. Maybe it's a tough one, but looking back at your own journey and how many great things you've done in the Bitcoin space, what is your personal and your proudest moment and accomplishment that you've done so far that you're kind of really stands out beyond the rest?
That's a really tough question, and in many ways to answer that. I mean, for one, the users of the software projects that I work, like specifically Wasabi, like the fact that there's been like tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people actually using this piece of code on their machine, protecting their own money, is just a growing like sense of achievement or accomplishment, and then like show us that like, wow, this is actually something that people are happy with and are using. Like, that is extremely rewarding. Maybe more so is when I meet someone who in my eyes is incredibly accomplished in the space, doing a fantastic piece of work, and he tells me that, your videos from like 5 years ago or more were really crucial in understanding Bitcoin and me getting dedicated to do something. Like that feeling is just wild, because you realize that something like a low effort produced video that costs like minutes to make, somehow encourage, even if it's just one person, to change his life and do something beautiful with it. That's just extremely profound. So that realization of just how incredibly powerful we are is one that just continues to amaze me.
Amazing. For sure, it's a priceless moment, getting back reassurance, and especially from people that have gone to achieve great things, and the fact that they're thankful for you showing them and shedding the light and essentially planting the seed. It's a true special feeling. And answered very well, Max. I didn't want to put you on the spot, and I know it's a tough question, but I think you answered it really well. And I think there's a lot more big things that you're yet to unleash on the world. We'll see as we go forward. These experiences will only compound, and there'll be greater things coming along for sure. So I guess the final question I'd like to ask you, Max, would be like I do with all guests, and in your particular case, since we're talking so much about privacy and taking back control, what is one, can be multiple, advice you would give to newcomers which are interested in essentially getting involved with Bitcoin and starting to store their own wealth in hardest form of money? What's some advice or resources that you would recommend them to, or just state of mind, essentially some tips from your personal experience?
Yeah, Bitcoin is all about individual sovereignty. The Sovereign Individual is a great book, and I think to a large extent what this means is that you should think for yourself and truly judge for yourself if the actions that you're doing are right or wrong. This is, I think, a very deep realization of there is nothing else that can and should make the decision for you. This is something that you have to be aware of. If you do bad things, wrong things, without even being conscious of it, then this is a road to hell will be quite difficult to get out of. So just really think of, do you have the right to do certain actions? Like, for example, using fiat. Because I don't think you do. I think it's fundamentally evil to use such systems of slavery. And that is something that is, I think, very important to think about. And of course, there's a lot of books and facts that have been kept in record to help on such a journey. And I think specifically the Cypherpunks are just truly onto something. And so I would very much recommend reading up in the Cypherpunk literature. There's one website which is great. Net was the original website, which unfortunately is down, but there's mirrors available. For example, anarplex.io. And here is a plethora of really sophisticated cypherpunk writings, specifically the aristocracy of action, which is fantastic, or the Second Realm book on strategy, which is basically street, and of my personal favorites, A Lodging of Wayfaring Men, a book by Paul Rosenberg, a fictional novel, however,
which you have an audiobook for the listeners.
Exactly, it's available on the Parallel Society podcast, so just on your podcatcher, or the freemansperspective.com website. And the fascinating book based on the story of a group of early cypherpunks building an early anonymous marketplace and anonymous digital currency. A really, really fascinating tale. So there's also another book that I can very much recommend to understand the fundamentals of Bitcoin, and that is Crypto Economics by Eric Voskuil, where I've also made the audiobook for. It's a bit more difficult because it's more technical with charts and stuff, so the audiobook is always format. PDF is available for free as well. So this book just explains with real rigor the praxeology of Bitcoin, right? The logic of why Bitcoin works and how it works, and what are its flaws. Bitcoin certainly has flaws. Absolutely, it's a must read as well, and probably by far the best economical treatise on Bitcoin so far. And I would even put it in the top 3 mental achievements of praxeology as a science more in general. Like there was first of the human action axiom by Ludwig von Mises, dialectics, right? So the thought of economics itself, and then later Hans Hermann Hoppe defined the argumentation axiom, and so that people have the capacity of finding out the truth as a starting point to discover more in catalytics, but even in the ethics, right? So we can even do more morality and wrong behaviors by simple starting points in a quite beautiful manner. And Eric Voskuil puts on top of this the axiom of resistance, meaning that security technology can only protect you if you resist an attacker. And this is an essential axiom required to produce any security infrastructure, and Bitcoin heavily relies on this axiom, and Satoshi was very aware of it. And so this book really puts another solid foundation under praxeological thought that clearly influenced Bitcoin and even more.
Incredible. I mean, you've given out so many good recommendations to books. I will try link as many as possible of them in the show notes, so it's easier for the listeners to go out and read. And also, I want to do a shout out for your own website, which you're currently working on and revamping maybe you could give a shout out to that, and we'll include it in the show notes, where you have a lot of resources for becoming a self-sovereign individual.
Yeah, towardsliberty.com. It has in an archive form a bunch of interesting books, mainly in economics, but also about Bitcoin and natural law philosophy and ethics. So yeah, as you said, in a very slow process of redesign, like many of my projects, including a book that's still upcoming on the praxeology of privacy, which is in an open source map being written. So part 1 and half of part 2 is out there in a very, very crude form. So yeah, eventually I will finish these projects and get some more structure into these thoughts of mine.
Amazing. Well, Max, I would like to thank you so much for taking the time. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. I would love to have you back in the future, because we and Bitcoin and everything is always evolving. So there's always going to be exciting new things to discuss and share with the audiences. I would like to ask you, what's the best place that we could send our listeners to follow you online? I guess Nost, right? After what we talked about.
Nost, it is
the best place to follow you.
towards.com. That's where I got my app. And yeah, you'll find me. And just a shout out there, and let's start some interesting in-depth conversation.
Amazing. Max, once again, thanks so much. Wishing you all the best of luck with all of your projects. As I see, your plate is always full. And yeah, good luck with everything. And if you ever want to come back, the invitation's always open. But certainly, if you don't reach out, I will definitely reach out to have you back, because I would love to continue this conversation as we progress into the future. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, I would highly appreciate it if you could boost, rate, review, and subscribe on the podcast platform of your choice. It would greatly help us spread these incredible stories and the message of Bitcoin freedom. Also, feel free to reach out to me and follow our social media accounts on X, NOSTR, YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram. I appreciate all of your support, and make sure to tune in next Thursday for the next episode. Thanks for listening, and remember to stack sats and stay humble.